Our objective for today is to understand cell structure and its function. We're going to focus on cells, their organelles, and the development of the cell theory. If you remember from the beginning of the year, we talked about cells. Cells made something living, and a cell is simply the basic unit of life. It's the smallest unit that's able to perform functions of living things. So if you remember looking at the pond water last week, you were able to see some different cells. And how did microscopes lead us to the discovery of cells? Back in the 1600s, Anton von Leeuwenhoek was first describing cells while he looked through a simple microscope. This was much different than the one we used last week. But this discovery led Robert Hooke to finding cells within cork. He was the first scientist to use the compound light microscope like the one that we were using last week. These helped Hooke identify the first cell. He referred to the cells like tiny rooms. If you remember, those of you who did a fake book over Robert Hooke, you can remember that he was a monk, and so he remembered and was comparing the cells to the rooms in his Montessori. And then in the 1830s, first Schleiden identified plant cells, and he made the assumption that all plants are made up of cells. Later, Thomas Schwann came along and had the same conclusion, but it was in regards to animal cells. So he stated that all animals were made up of cells. And the four of them, von Leeuwenhoek, Hooke, Schleiden, and Schwann, all came up with what we now call the cell theory. The first portion of the cell theory says that all living things are made up of at least one or more cells. The second part, cells are the smallest, most basic unit of all living things. And the third portion, all cells come from pre-existing cells through division. So if you look here is an animal cell, thousands of these make up this one bird. And based on how many cells an organism has, then we can call it unicellular or multicellular. So unicellular means it's composed of only one cell. And here's your example. So this would be your cell. These tiny things are called flagella. Or the organism can be multicellular, like this butterfly. That means it's made up of many cells. We are multicellular organisms. Another distinction is a cell can either be a prokaryote or a eukaryote. An easy way to remember this is the prologue to a book. It comes before the book ever begins. So prokaryotes were before a nucleus, or any other organelles for that matter. Example, bacteria. Eukaryotes are different. Remember, a eulogy is given after somebody has lived. It's usually given at their funeral. So eukaryotes came after the nucleus had been discovered. And these organisms are plants and animals, some protozoans and fungi. They all have a nucleus and they all have these tiny things called organelles. Organelles are structures within cells that have a specific function. They are surrounded by a membrane, such as the cell membrane, and found only in eukaryotes. So those prokaryotes that do not have a nucleus, they do not have organelles either. Here you can see the image. Here's your boundary or your membrane, And inside that membrane you have cytoplasm and no known organelles. However, over here, with this eukaryotic animal cell, we have all these tiny structures that are formed inside the membrane. Prokaryotes were believed to be the first cells, and that over time cells have evolved and we have gained eukaryotes. Prokaryotes lack that nucleus or organelles. The genetic material is this nucleoid, and it's just free floating inside this jelly-like substance known as the cytoplasm. And then if you can see the tiny little dots scattered throughout the cytoplasm, those are called ribosomes, and they are responsible for protein production. Those are about the only structures found in a prokaryote. They're very simple. Eukaryotic cells can be divided into plant cells or animal cells. Note that this is a plant cell because it has chloroplasts which turn it green, and it also has this outside boundary such as the cell wall.